there were some Native American writers that published crime novels with the big New York presses in the 1990s, and then it just ends. No
Oh,
Native American author published with a big New York publishing house since 1992. Now,
wow.
we did have non-Native writers. I'm thinking of Tony Hillerman
Yeah.
here, who wrote books about, set on reservations
Mm-hmm.
and with Native American characters, but they were not natives
Mm-hmm.
themselves. And so, I knew this because I wrote my thesis, my critical thesis for my master's program on indigenous crime fiction. And I was
Oh,
stunned
cool.
to find out that for nearly 3 decades, no native author had published with one of the big presses in a crime
Wow.
fiction novel.
Huh.
And so here I am writing a crime novel that is set right on the Rosebud Reservation,
Yeah.
deeply steeped in Lakota traditions, mythology,
Mm.
characters. And so I was not sure that it was going to be published at all.
Hmm.
Um,
Welcome to Are We Happy Yet?
I'm Hannah Buzzo, licensed therapist.
I'm Jane Thatcher Hahn, licensed clinical social worker. We're not just friends, we're therapists who have been working with our clients on improving their mental health and relationships for years. Coupled with our own life experiences, we found ourselves in a conundrum. As mental health becomes less stigmatized and conversations about healing, self-help, and personal growth have gone mainstream, why are more and more Americans reporting lower life satisfaction and increased mental health issues with each passing year?
The question kept nagging at us. Despite the growing openness around mental health, why are we seeing an increase in anxiety, depression, and isolation?
It's baffling, right? We're all diving into therapy, self-help, psychedelics, meditation, life hacks, you name it. But the sense of connection and well-being seems to be slipping away, no matter what we do.
So Jane and I got curious about the bigger picture, how creativity, politics, technology, work, spirituality, culture, and more impact our well-being. Our goal is to spark open, relatable conversations about these topics. Through unfiltered discussions, a few uncomfortable truths, we'll have lots of laughter and lightheartedness along the way. Join us each week as we dig deep into these questions, share insights, and try to understand what will truly, finally, make us happy.
Let's go. Welcome everybody to the Are We Happy Yet podcast. I am one of your hosts, Jane Thatcher Hahn. Sadly, my other half, Hannah Buzzo, is out sick today, so we're going to send her lots of love. But I am feeling incredibly honored and delighted that our guest is here with us today, who's a very accomplished and talented human being and doing very, very cool things in the world. David Heska Wanbli Weiden is here with us. He is many, many things. He is an author. He is a professor. He is the recipient of many awards and positive feedback about the work that he's done in the world. He is a member of the Sechangu Lakota Nation. And is that how we say it? Do we say member? Do we say descendant? What's some good language?
we generally say citizen,
Citizen.
because Native nations are independent, sovereign countries within the boundaries of the United States. So citizen, but member's not wrong.
Okay, perfect. Well, David, thank you so much for being here with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, what a delight. David is over in New York, in Brooklyn. His name came to me through the Lighthouse Writers Workshop, which, if you listen to the podcast, you know that's a nonprofit organization that I have taught for. He has taught for as well. In fact, our very first podcast guest was Joy Rouillet Sawyer, who is a teacher over there. So she said, "Oh, you got to get David on the podcast." So thank you so much for being here. Yeah.
My pleasure.
Yeah, I told you this before, but I was just writing things down from your bio and I was like, oh my God, I'm going to let him tell the world all the things that he's done. But I know you have an MFA in creative writing, a law degree, a PhD, your book, Winter Counts, which both Hannah and I loved and couldn't put down. We're going to talk a lot about today. And I am going to get copies for lots of the people in my life. But it has won multiple awards, including Best Book of the Year from NPR, Amazon, Publishers Weekly, Library Journal, The Guardian, and more. Time has put it on its one of the 100 best mystery novels of all time. So if that's not enough to get a copy in your hand, I think by the end of the interview, you will definitely want to be picking it up. It's not only a great page turner and a great sort of mystery crime thriller, but it explores a lot of really important concepts that we're going to look at today. So, David, how's that for an introduction? What can you add? Tell us more about who you are and what you're doing in the world and how you got to where you are today.
Well, thank you for that very, very generous introduction and overview. So again, I am David Heska Wanbli Weiden, as you noted, a citizen of the Sichangu Lakota Nation, in English, the Rosebud Sioux Tribe, which is located in South Dakota. My people are from there. My mom was raised there. My people are buried there. My grandparents, my great-grandparents, these are the traditional lands that the Lakota people of our particular branch have occupied for many, many decades, hundreds of years. Yeah. And so that land is very important to me. But I did grow up in Denver, Colorado, and I did teach and still teach occasionally for the Lighthouse Writers Workshop, which is one of the great, really resources for emerging and established writers in the Colorado area. And I love those folks.
Yeah,
they are great. I was a professor of Native American Studies in Denver at Metropolitan State University of Denver for over a decade, but I was in fact hired away. I'm now a professor of English and a full professor of English and Native American Studies at Stony Brook University in Long Island. So I'm in Brooklyn right now, and I take the trains, and that's plural there, trains, for a 3-hour commute back and forth to Long Island.
Oh my gosh, so, David, that's amazing. Okay.
This is this is living on the East Coast, but I'm learning how to navigate the subways and the Long Island Railroad and all that. And so far it's been really exciting. But again, I did grow up in Denver. I grew up until age 10 in the Swansea neighborhood, Swansea, Elyria, which is by the dog food factory. That's everybody knows it on I-70 in North Denver. And then at age 10, my parents split up and I moved with my mother to original Aurora. So this is old Aurora. This is Colfax, near Colfax in Havana. So I grew up there. I went to Aurora Central High School. And then, yes, as you mentioned, I have a bachelor's degree from the University of Colorado and a law degree from the University of Denver. I am an attorney. I don't really practice anymore. We can certainly talk about that later.
Yes, please.
Teaching is really my thing. So I do have a PhD from Texas, and I've taught at a number of schools. And then about 15 years ago, I began trying my hand at writing because I've always been obsessed with literature and books. And I thought, well, now maybe this is the time to do it. And so I published a number of short stories and such, and then Winter Counts, which honestly, I did not know how the book was going to be received, but it was a national bestseller. It's been published translated in 5-6 different countries.
Wow.
It's been optioned for film and television, and people just really love it. And we can talk more about that later, but I'm just so honored to be able to write about the Rosebud Reservation and my character, Virgil Wounded Horse. So, and I'm also the proud father of 2 boys.
Lovely.
My 2 sons. Yeah, one is a sophomore in college at Dartmouth in New Hampshire.
Oh, wow.
And the other is finishing up his high school career and doing college applications right now as we speak. So it's an exciting time in our household.
Okay,
so I think that's probably a good place to stop.
Yeah. And they sounds like they made the move to Brooklyn with you.
No. David, my older son, David Jr., is in New Hampshire in college, but younger son, Alexander, is staying in Colorado, where my partner is keeping things going. And I fly back and forth as much as I can. We talked about it, but moving him out of his high school in the senior year was not something I wanted to do because he's tearing it up. He's the president of his robotics team.
Cool.
He works on a research study at the CU Medical School.
Oh, wow.
To try. Yeah. He works with Dr. Nicole Tuitt, who is just an amazing person, to create, they're working on a new research study to help youth of color in the Denver metro area. And so he's got a lot of things happening right now. So I fly back and forth. It's been hard on me being away from my son and my partner, but this is how it is. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, you got plucked away. Sounds like somebody else wanted you, and I could see why. Yeah. 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 And I'm just curious for our creatives, just can you talk a little bit about, I didn't know how this book was going to be received, but I wrote it anyways, because I think a lot of people, you know, it's scary to write something that you don't know how it's going to be received. So did you just go for it? Like, tell us a little bit about that process.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about this. I mean, I've told this story before, but I think it bears repeating. In other interviews, I've told it. But so Native American literature really kind of starts in a big way in 1968. It's something called the Native American Renaissance. There was certainly Native American literature before then, but in 1968, 69, N. Scott Momaday writes a book called Housemaid of Dawn, which wins the Pulitzer Prize for fiction.
Yes.
And then we have all of these great writers that start exploding, and the big New York publishers begin publishing Native American writers. But they were all pretty much tending to write in this genre that we call literary fiction.
Okay.
So that is fiction that mainly deals with character and prose, is less, you know, informed by plot and story. I think it's oversimplifying. So now there were a couple. So that's the big explosion in Native American literature.
Yeah,
okay. A handful of Native writers in the 80s and early 90s wrote some genre novels. Now, by genre, for those who don't know that, genre literature also likes character and prose, but also deals with plot and story. And so in genre, we have crime fiction, which is what I guess I'm pigeonholed as. We have science fiction, speculative, horror fiction, romance, historical fiction, young adult fiction. Those are all called genre fiction. Well, okay, so where I'm going with this is there were some Native American writers that published crime novels with the big New York presses in the 1990s, and then it just ends. No Native American author published with a big New York publishing house since 1992.
Wow.
Now, we did have non-Native writers, I'm thinking of Tony Hillerman here, who wrote books about, you know, set on reservations and with Native American characters, but they were not natives themselves. And so, you know, I knew this because I wrote my thesis, my critical thesis for my master's program on indigenous crime fiction. And I was stunned to find out that for nearly 3 decades, no Native author had published with one of the big presses in a crime fiction novel. And so here I am writing a crime novel that is set right on the Rosebud Reservation, deeply steeped in Lakota traditions, mythology, characters. And so I was not sure that it was going to be published at all. And so to my great surprise, I had a fair number of New York publishers competing to get the book. And so I landed with Echo, a division of HarperCollins, and they've been wonderful to work with.
Great.
And so the book simply exploded. So that was great. Now, you know, hurdle number 2 was the book came out in the first wave of the pandemic when every bookstore in America was closed.
Oh God, yes.
But somehow people found the book, and like I said, it was a bestseller. Anyway, so that's sort of, I didn't know how the book was going to be received or even published. So that's sort of the big picture of what happened with the novel.
Okay. That's such an interesting history. And I want to get into Winter Counts, but as you're talking, I'm thinking about, and I bet you have a better sense of this than I do. So we've been watching Reservation Dogs, Resball, all of those things, Sterling Harjo and that group of people, and some of the music that's coming out of Oklahoma and that group of creatives. And then you've got Killers of the Flower Moon. Is this a trend that we're seeing in movie and TV and music, or am I late to the game?
Very much so. It's absolutely a trend that we're seeing really across all arts. 2 weeks ago, I took the subway into Manhattan from Brooklyn, and I saw a performance by Raven Chacon, who is the first indigenous musician to win the Pulitzer Prize in music.
Oh,
He's Navajo,
wow.
and he
Okay.
won it 2 years ago in 2022. So he was doing a concert at the New School in New York City. So I went and I chatted with him. Right now, I think we are seeing indigenous art and culture really explode. Certainly in literature, in all the different genres, and literary fiction, of course, continues to be a home for Native American writers. But as you noted, TV, film, music, dance, fashion, it is absolutely exploding right now. Now, in politics too, there have been numerous politicians and policymakers that have come into prominence as well. Deborah Haaland, Secretary of the Interior and such. So politics, obviously, we're in a time of transition right now. And so, we will see what happens there. But I can safely say on the artistic side that indigenous art and culture is at probably the highest point it's ever been.
Yes. And I will say, did you watch Reservation Dogs? Did you see that TV show?
I did.
I thought it was some of the best TV I've ever seen. I loved that series. And so I think that some of the art that's coming out of this movement is just profound and beautiful and moving. Do we have a sense of what paved the way for that, or why we're seeing this renaissance, or is this just a time in history when we're open and ready for that?
I've heard a couple of different theories. Now, first of all, Reservation Dogs, great show. It's ended, but listeners and viewers, if you haven't seen it, go out and see it. It's fantastic. I know a lot of those folks because we all went to the same graduate school. The Institute of American Indian Arts is an arts school in Santa Fe, New Mexico, that's both an undergrad institution, and they also have several master's degree programs. I was one of their very first students in their Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing.
Very cool.
And that's been a real stimulus. So a lot of the people that I think are kind of leading the way right now tended to go to that school. My friend Tommy Orange, lots and lots of folks went to, we call it IAIA.
Okay.
It was that, and I think there's just been sort of a turn about 10 years ago to try to bring more people of color into the conversation artistically.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of what happened. And, hopefully we just had some good people that were doing good work too at the right time. So, lots of good stuff happening.
Yeah. It's been so feel very lucky to be watching all that unfold. All right, I want to talk about Winter Counts, and I'm going to be so careful to not give away anything because it is a great mystery and thriller and crime novel. So tell me if I go too far. But I'm curious about this concept of and that a lot of these artists are doing, of using sort of fiction or art to like really hit on some of these big issues, cultural and mental health issues and poverty, these, a lot of these things. Was that a purposeful decision to use fiction to explore those things?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
So as you noted in your introduction, I wear a lot of different hats.
Yeah.
So I'm a tenured professor of Native American studies, now in New York, but previously in Denver. And so I've spent most of my career really writing about Native and indigenous issues. And also I write about legal issues as well. And I love doing traditional scholarship. However, the academic world sometimes is very insular. Yeah. And sometimes you're just writing for other scholars. Now, that's not always true, but I would say it's often true. And so I had been teaching about the legal issues in Winter Counts, which we can delve into a little bit later.
Sure.
Teaching those for, a decade. And, I knew there were some real problems with criminal justice enforcement on Native American reservations. And so I decided in my novel to incorporate these legal and political issues into a novel, use the medium of fiction to try to, expose people to, some of these topics. And really, the novel sold so well. I mean, hundreds of thousands of readers that I believe, I helped. I think I did help contribute to the national dialogue about some of these issues on Native American reservations.
Yes.
I've heard from politicians, indeed, the Pine Ridge Reservation, which is right next to ours, they're also Lakota, they filed a lawsuit against the federal government addressing some of these issues that I talked about in the book. They filed it 2 years after my book came out. I published an essay in the New York Times, which has a circulation of 8 million people talking about these issues. And so, I think that fiction can have the ability to, really educate people that might, that are probably not going to pick up an academic journal,
right.
And so I've been really, really thrilled about that. So it was absolutely a completely conscious decision to talk about 4 or 5 social issues in the novel.
Yes. Yeah. And that really came through in some of the reading I did of some reviews. A lot of people were saying, I was astounded to find out XYZ, or I was totally shocked to learn this about, the Rosebud Reservation or reservations in general. And I think you're reaching people that wouldn't otherwise have been either privy to that information or interested in that information. So it's a pretty exciting forum to talk about those things. Yeah.
Thank you.
I've written down sort of the things that really hit me, but when you think about like those 4 or 5 top issues that you explored in Winter Counts, what do you identify as those? Like what was really important for you?
Well, the primary social issue in the book is criminal justice enforcement on reservations. And I'll try to not make this too boring, but there was a law passed in 1885 by the U.S. Congress called the Major Crimes Act. And this law still exists today. So for 140 years, this law has existed, and it affects every Native American reservation in the USA. And what it does is it takes away our nation's abilities to prosecute felony crimes. So when a felony crime happens on a Native American reservation, we can arrest the person. Maybe somebody has harmed a child or killed someone or committed arson. We can arrest the person, but then we are obligated to call up the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office, and they investigate it and they decide whether or not to prosecute it. Yeah. So Native American police and Native American court officials have to delegate that to U.S. officials. Now, this in and of itself is problematic, right? Because sovereign nations should have the right to prosecute their own crimes and set their own punishments. Yes. But putting that aside, the problem is that the U.S. government has not given the amount of resources that, in my view, are necessary to adequately prosecute these felony crimes. So by their own tally, the U.S. government declines to prosecute anywhere from 30 to 50% of felony crimes that happen on reservations. Wow. So child abuse cases, sexual assault of women, rapes, all of these murders, about half of the time or 40% of the time, the offenders go free. And this contributes to the phenomenon of missing and murdered indigenous women and relatives. It's just a huge problem. And we simply need, in my view, more FBI agents on reservations. On my reservation, there's only 1 or 2 at most that really help prosecute all of these felony cases. So they're swamped. Yeah. And indeed, and as well as we need more money from the federal government, they fund a lot of our tribal police as well. Okay. And so it's a complicated issue, but the bottom line is this: serious felony crimes are not being adequately prosecuted on Native reservations. And that creates a huge quality of life problem on reservations of women getting attacked, kids getting hurt, people getting killed, drugs being sold. And so that was the number one issue that I wanted to hit. Yes. So I'll stop there if you want to weigh in.
Sure. I think that, we talk a lot about mental health, but I'm just hearing all the major traumas, right? That are sort of just either being allowed or not being prosecuted or not being addressed, the rapes and the murders and the kidnappings and those kinds of things, that I'm glad you're linking that to quality of life. So we're not separating those things. Of course, that has I'm assuming a huge impact on mental health, well-being, a sense of safety in the world, a sense of support from the criminal justice system. Will you talk a little bit about your main character and how he developed? Because he's such a great, his arc is so beautiful, but he's also just got some great qualities. And I feel like he was sort of the perfect main character to explore the issues of justice. Yeah.
Yeah. So my main character in Winter Counts is named Virgil Wounded Horse, and he is a hired vigilante. So these people actually exist on many reservations. So we've established that the U.S. government is not adequately prosecuting these felony cases. And so the bad guys are going free.
Yeah.
So on some reservations, people are hiring private thugs or enforcers to go out and get some justice.
Yeah.
If somebody harmed your child or harmed your sister or your cousin, and the U.S. government said, well, you're free to go, you might be tempted to hire somebody like my character, Virgil Wounded Horse, who will lay down a beating on someone for a price. Yeah. And his price is $100 for each black eye, each tooth he knocks out, and each bone he breaks. That's his price. So, so now let me be clear. I do not condone vigilante justice. I think that, we need to let the police do their job. But what if we have in the USA communities where there is not adequate law enforcement, where the government is shirking its duty to prosecute and enforce the law and keep peace?
Yeah.
You can see how there might be a temptation. And I want to be clear, it's not the FBI agents themselves. I mean, most of them that I talked to when I did my research are good people that are doing the best they can, but they don't have the manpower or the person power. Like if a child goes missing, right, it's only 2 on the Rosebud Reservation. They can't do a large scale search for a missing child, or a missing woman. They just don't have the resources.
Yeah.
So I'm saying we have a lot of money in this country, and I think we could give just a tiny bit more to keep the promises that we made to Native American people when we took when the U.S. government took the continent away and gave us these little teeny chunks of land. Right. Well, you made us some promises that you'd make sure that we would have safe places to live.
Yeah.
Food, adequate health care, and I address all of those in the book. So Virgil Wounded Horse, then these hired vigilante, he's a response to some of the laws that the U.S. government has passed.
Yeah, and it sounds so. What you're saying is you're hearing it. There's a big funding issue, right? You didn't get the sense of that the FBI agents didn't care as much as that they didn't have the resources, or maybe a little bit of both.
Well,
or is that a loaded question? We can always cut that out.
I do give I give a lecture. I travel around to schools and universities and festivals and events, and I have a whole lecture on this. And what I did discover, I'm a PhD social scientist. And so, I traveled to the reservation when I was doing research for this book, and I talked to a lot of people, the chief of police for the Rosebud Reservation. I talked to FBI agents. I talked to a lot of folks and elders in the community, and they told me that the FBI agents are overwhelmed, but some of them, not all, some of them were not really interested in bridging the gap in cultures. So they would often be impatient, condescending. Now, this is not me saying this. This is what I heard from my respondents. And so it's no wonder that sometimes Native American people wouldn't want to cooperate with them if somebody comes in. And by the way, the FBI agents, at least on my reservation, they don't even live on the reservation. They live in Pierre, South Dakota, 100 miles away.
Oh, wow.
So, and they often get shifted out. They spend 2 to 4 years on a post on the reservation, and then they want out, and so they leave. And so then you get a new crop in, and they have to create these relationships all over again.
Yeah.
So there really, it's a problem, an issue that has a lot of different angles to it. I want to be clear here. I think there are great FBI agents that are trying to do the best they can. And then, to be completely honest, I think there are some that maybe they're newbies and they got a post they didn't like on the reservation. And maybe they're not too interested. They want to go someplace cool and more exciting, I don't know. And maybe they're not putting in as much effort as I would like to see.
Yeah.
So again, there are a lot of different facets to this.
Yeah, complex, which sure, I get that maybe this isn't the post you want, XYZ, but what you're saying is there's such real consequences to that, right? There's such
Oh, yes.
profound, like your life, your people's life, the families, friends, violence, the repercussions are so significant. Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about, so for you, justice was kind of the overarching, one of the big overarching themes. There's some great exploration of food and relationships to food equity. I love the character that comes in that has the food truck from California and sort of the play of all of those things. Will you talk with us a little bit about that?
Sure. So, like I said, there are a number of issues that I explore in Winter Counts. And a big one is the issue of food and nutrition on the reservation. So, again, I've mentioned this in a lot of different interviews before, but it's just a fact. We have terrible health outcomes on the Rosebud Reservation. The average life expectancy for a man on the reservation, living on the reservation, is around age 50. Wow. And for a woman, it's like 3 or 4 years beyond that. So we tend to live about 2 or 3 decades less than people off the reservation. And there are a lot of, again, explanations for this. Our healthcare system, which I won't talk about it right at this moment, but food as well. We have a real problem with healthy and sustainable food on the reservation. So my reservation, the Rosebud Reservation, is about the size of Delaware.
Okay.
And we have 2 grocery stores on the reservation. What that means, and they're in the heart of it. If you live in the corner of the reservation, you are probably relying upon these little convenience stores, or bodegas, as I've learned to call them in New York.
Oh,
yeah, I've just been told. Yeah. Anyway, and because a lot of our elders, they don't have cars and such, and so they can't drive 80 miles to the Turtle Creek, which is the name of our tribal sponsored grocery store. They can't do that, so they just have to go to the convenience store, beef jerky and frozen foods. And so, and so we have a real problem, I think, with getting healthy foods to our people. Now, we do get foods from the government. It's called commodities, or commods, as we call them. So again, part of the deal that was made with the government is they took the land, but they agreed to give us food forever. So we do have trucks that go out every couple of weeks and give boxes of food to people. Okay. But these boxes have often been filled with not very healthy stuff. Right. Now, to be fair, there have been some changes in the last couple of years. Okay. But again, it's just getting healthy food in the hands of people that need it the most, I think, is the least we could do for the first inhabitants of this country. Absolutely. So there's that. Yeah. Now, Chef Lack, as you mentioned, that's a separate issue. There is this sort of new burgeoning indigenous food movement in America. I was in Minneapolis a couple of years ago, and I went to this very fancy restaurant, which got a Michelin star, and it was called the Best New Restaurant of the Year, run by a Lakota gentleman, a chef named Sean Sherman. And the restaurant is called Wanbli. And it was fantastic. So he has a cuisine that is cooked and uses ingredients pre-colonization, pre-contact. So no wheat, no sugar, no beef. In other words, using ingredients that we would have eaten, in the 1400s. Yeah. And it was fantastic. It was some of the best food I ever had. But it's also very pricey. And so, your average person on the reservation is not going to be able to afford a $150 meal. Sure. I mean, we've got people that are just trying to make it. The standard of living on my reservation, people tend to make the average yearly income there is like around $8,000. Wow. So, they're barely making it. So that's a whole separate thing, this new indigenous food movement that I kind of bring up as well. And I think it's a good thing, but I also want to see supporting people that can't afford like bison meat, which is very expensive,
Yeah.
So
I really liked the complexity of your main character's response to the indigenous food movement, and his recollecting, you know, his relationship to fry bread or some of these things that weren't what indigenous people were eating in the 1400s, right? But are what Virgil grew up eating and what is cultural, you know, happening for him on the reservation now. And there's just the complexity and nuance of that, I think, was helpful and part of why I loved the, you know, fiction, to be able to explore the complexity of our relationship to food and tradition, and then new young people coming up with new ideas about how to do things. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. I mean, fry bread is a really loaded concept in indigenous circles, because it is the iconic food. If people don't know, it's similar to a tortilla, but it's fluffier, and you know, it's essentially just like wheat oil that's fried. You know, it's fried wheat mixed with I guess some baking soda and stuff, a flour that's mixed with baking soda, and then deep fried. Okay, so it's not really health food. It is great, you know, but it's not, you know, we have a huge problem with diabetes. My own mother died from it.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
And and you know, and so we have this iconic food that our grandmothers and great grandmothers made, because the boxes they would get from the government, often it didn't have meat or vegetables or anything like that. So they did what they had to do to keep their family alive, and they invented this new form of bread.
Yeah.
But again, so some people are like, no, we need to eat healthier, and others are like, no, that's our food. So that also is a super complicated issue.
Yeah. And I think, I think nuance and complexity definitely coming through on those things. There's other issues you talk about in the book, but one of the main events is that the main character's nephew has a relationship with drugs. I don't want to give anything away, because I don't want to take the pleasure away from anybody. But what are you seeing on the Rosebud Reservation now in terms of cartel, drugs, drug use?
Yeah, the big problem, I would say, on most Native reservations, but certainly on the Rosebud Reservation, is methamphetamine. That's the huge problem that we have. You drive around our reservation, and understand, housing stock is really tough to come by on our reservation. We don't have enough housing to you know, just for the 20,000 people that live on our reservation. You know, housing is really tough to come by. A lot of our people live in abandoned FEMA trailers and stuff, you know, but we have like these, you know, cheap, crappy houses that were built by the government. But you drive around and you will see a fair number of them that are boarded up. That, of course, is because they were used to cook meth, which makes them uninhabitable. And so meth is, now I don't really address that in the book. My first draft of the book, I did make it meth, but it's not too much of a spoiler to say that in the book, I make the drug problem be heroin, which is on the reservation, but not, to be honest, not as big a problem as methamphetamine. You know, I think harder drugs like black tar heroin and such, that's going to vary from reservation to reservation. But my sense is, and I'm not an expert here, is that methamphetamine is a plague on nearly every reservation out there, because I think it's easier. I think you can make it right from like cold medications and stuff. So it's easier to get and create and highly addictive. And so that really is the big problem right now, to my understanding.
Yeah. And do you get, you know, in the book, you talk about sort of outside forces bringing drugs onto the reservation. Does that seem like a fairly big problem as well?
You know, it was a problem about 5 or 6 years ago. Again, I don't have my, you know, ear to the ground on that issue completely, but at least what I'm reading, my general sense is that may have declined to some degree. I do know that for a while there was a real effort to try and bring black tar heroin into the U.S. in different ways, and they were targeting Native American reservations. Maybe it's happening and I just don't know about it. But I haven't read a lot about it lately. So again, that's the part of the book that, you know, if I wanted to be really true to life, I would have focused on methamphetamine, but for plot reasons, I needed it to be something different. And so I changed it to heroin.
Yep. And then you got to spend time in Denver. So for those of you who are from Colorado, there's some great Denver iconic places and spaces in the book. And I love when you go to Casa Bonita and the romance rekindles in Black Bart's. It's a Black Bart's cave. Yeah, I was like, this is the perfect place for like an awkward first kiss to happen or rekindled relationship.
Yeah, I invented, I'm a Denver native. And so I invented a plot reason because I just really wanted to write about 3 or 4 chapters with Virgil and his ex-girlfriend Marie going to Denver. Yes. So I kind of invented a way for that to happen because I wanted to write, they do go to Casa Bonita. And I wrote it before the reboot of it, you know, and I was able to get a reservation there about a year ago or 8 months ago, something like that. And it's fantastic. Yes. The new Casa Bonita, I love it. I mean, I've always loved it, but now the food is good. I mean, I was just thrilled, and they kept everything the way it was. They just made it better. So I was, I mean, again, the Casa Bonita chapter was written before the South Bar guys bought it and renewed it, you know. But I also have Virgil go into a weed shop, you know, a cannabis shop, which was really cool. Now there, real life is actually starting to catch up with me because this month, I believe, the first cannabis shop is opening on the Rosebud Reservation.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So there we have, you know, real life events kind of catching up with me and making, but it's fiction, you know, but catching, you know, but it, you know, were I to write it now, I wouldn't have Virgil be so dumbstruck, you know, just like, wow, this is weed, this is crazy, because there is one opening, I think, just this month on the Rosebud Reservation. There's been one on the Pine Ridge Reservation, which is just about 100 miles from us for a while, but we finally got it going there. So there you go.
Okay, well, but listen, that's when you wrote it, it wasn't there, right? So okay. The other interesting thing I noticed with Virgil and his arc is his relationship to his indigenous roots and to his spiritual heritage, and how you kind of see that maybe a struggle over time and sort of change over time. I'd love to hear more thoughts about that for your character, but also if that's sort of something that you've noticed within your own community.
Yeah. So really the big theme of the book, I believe, is identity. When I was writing the book, I was thinking about what is the theme of this book. Initially, I thought, well, this is a book about criminal justice. And that is a big part of it. But the more I wrote it, I saw the true theme of the book, in my view anyway, is it's about Virgil's identity. So Virgil is an Heska, which is, people listening to this, don't go to the reservation and use that word. Okay. So do not do that. Thank you. Okay. Because that is a slur. Okay. It means, it originally meant translator. Then it began to mean speaks white, and now it means half-breed or mixed. And it's kind of a slur, an insult. And so Virgil is mixed. And so he, you know, and in the book you can read, he initially, you know, as a kid, he rejects his Lakota identity. So he's Lakota, but he rejects the traditions, the ceremonies, the culture. Obviously, over the course of the book, he has a change of heart. I don't think that's too much of a spoiler.
No, yeah.
And you know, and so, you know, to me, the identity theme was really important because, you know, Virgil is struggling as we all are, it seems to me, you know, and I think the theme of, you know, being uncertain and trying to figure out your identity is something that doesn't just affect Native Americans, you know, but all of us, we're trying to figure out, what is our identity? Where do we fit in? How do we negotiate this complex society? And Virgil is trying to figure that out because he's also raising his 14-year-old nephew, Nathan. And so he's like a father of sorts. He's negotiating that part of his identity. And also, you know, he gets into a relationship again with Marie, you know, so he's negotiating, you know, sort of these different bits of his fractured identity. And the Lakota part of it was really important to me because it is weird. Again, I grew up in Denver, and it's tough to be Native in Denver. We have a few things, the Denver Indian Center and such, that was great when I was growing up. My kids spent summers there and summer camp at Denver Indian Center and such. But then we'd go to the reservation, and, you know, there we would be much more immersed in some of our religious traditions and ceremonies and such. And so it was hard to be, so part of that identity is, being an urban native versus a reservation native, that is tough to negotiate. And my two sons have really struggled. I wouldn't say struggled, but it's something they're aware of, because when they go to the reservation, they see the poverty there, and we're certainly not rich, but we are not struggling quite as badly as the folks on the reservation. And they feel some guilt about this. And so both of my kids are planning to devote their careers to Native American issues and trying to make things better for all natives. So they're struggling with this as well. So identity is absolutely a big part of the novel.
Yeah. And is there a local conversation about, or tension around, staying on the reservation or leaving the reservation?
I'd say so. It's probably more pronounced in some places, some reservations. I was in residence at an artist colony called McDowell. So McDowell is one of the great artist residencies. It's been around for over 100 years. It's in New Hampshire. It's where artists, they choose 300 a year, the top artists in 7 different artistic disciplines. And so I was there, and I was with a friend, a Navajo from Arizona, Dinet, and he's a great guy, and he was really having a tough time just being away from his reservation. He was like thinking about leaving. He was just struggling, literally being away from that, from his place that he loves so much. So I think that some of the Southwestern tribes, it's more of an issue leaving the reservation. In the Lakota world, a lot of us will leave and go to Rapid City, which is the big city of sorts in South Dakota, or Denver, or Sioux Falls. But yeah, is there a tension? Yeah, I do feel guilty. I would love to live on the reservation, but I'm in possibly the exact opposite of the reservation. I'm in New York City right now. You could not be any further away from the reservation as I am. But there you go. I've got bills to pay. So there's a tension there. Sure.
Yeah. Well, and actually, since we're on this topic of identity, one of the things I particularly am interested in talking about on the podcast is having all these multiple identities and living in what often feels to me like a world that would prefer or can sort of perceive me more with one identity, right? You're a therapist. Okay, that's one thing. Or you're an artist, or you're a writer, you're a musician, you're a woman, you're this, you're that. So I'm curious, as somebody who seems to have many identities, what that's like for you, how you integrate those, how you feel like the world reacts to those multiple identities.
Yeah, I feel this very acutely, probably more so in the past, because remember, I have a PhD in political science. So I am a trained social scientist, and my work was largely quantitative and statistical. So the political science and economics, the social science disciplines these days are largely mathematical and statistical. So I was trained in that at the University of Texas at Austin, where I did my PhD. And so I was trained as a quantitative social scientist. Now, earlier I'd been a lawyer, and that's another thing we can swing back to. But then I moved to being a writer, and now I'm a professor of English. And wow, so I feel, at times, like a lot of my political science friends, they have no idea that I'm, I guess, a reasonably well-known novelist. They had no idea. They were like, wait, because I do have a book out on the U.S. Supreme Court, and they're like, wait, what?
Wow.
So there's that, so I've got that. And obviously the identity, I'm a dad, and you put on that hat. I'm a father, my 2 sons. I feel this split a lot because I'm trained in different ways. Again, I'm a licensed attorney, a social scientist, and I have an MFA degree. But I think that helped me in a way, because it allowed me to bring together a lot of these strands in a way that not many other writers were able to do, because I had this training. And it also gave me sort of an outsider's perspective. Sometimes being a little bit removed from a culture allows you to observe it more closely, which is what we want as writers. We want to be able to observe. And so, I do feel that in the past I was really struggling, because I was trying to keep my statistical work going for a while, but now I've just, I've kind of said my goodbyes to political science. Sorry, political science people out there, but
been a good run.
I just feel, but I was kind of really struggling to do that for a while, but now I feel that I've kind of reconciled all of these as best I can.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Do you feel like there have been people or groups of people who couldn't see your multiple identities or prefer you in one identity or want to pigeonhole you?
Yes, very much so. There is a real bias in the academy against creative work. So at some of the colleges that I've been at, and I've taught at a number of different places. I taught at Indiana University, Hofstra University, Metropolitan State University, and now I'm at Stony Brook, which is the flagship university of the State University of New York system. And my department now loves creative work, but at some of the places I've been at, they have, social scientists and academics would tend to discount creative work because it is not, they don't think it's as rigorous or as important because we make it up. But I can tell you that learning how to write fiction effectively is a craft that requires just as much training as law or political science or anything else. It really is a craft. And I teach creative writing now. And I mean, I do feel that my creative work has been devalued by some of the folks that I've worked with, but I made my peace with that.
Oh, so. Good. Yeah. Yeah. I feel that I've always felt a tension between a professional career and a creative career, especially because what I did creatively was make music, play songs, rock and roll, so there's always been sort of, I've noticed myself hiding different parts of my identity, really big pieces of my identity, and then trying to understand how they could integrate and how I could feel more integrated and also present more. And also say, like, I also feel a pressure from sort of a marketing standpoint of, like, where with a creative, you might say, this is what this creative does. They're a novelist, or they're a musician, they're a painter. So you're sort of presenting to the world. And sometimes I feel this pressure of trying to say what I am and who I am to the world. But then I feel too complex to sort of package that up in like a website or a marketing sort of promotional type of thing.
Yeah, I hear you. And I mean, about the marketing side of it and just presenting all of these aspects to everybody, I gave up on that a long time ago. So if you go to my website, which if anybody's listening, it's davidweiden.com.
Perfect. And we'll link that.
Weiden.
Sure. Yep.
And you won't see anything in there about my law work, because I published a lot in law. I have lots and lots of Native American political science articles that I publish in journals and such. And you just won't find anything about that in there, because I don't really think that my readers, people that are reading Winter Counts, probably are not interested in a statistical study of the Canadian Supreme Court, okay, which I
That's
actually
have
written on, okay, and so and so so those that want to track down my academic work, if they're insane enough to do so, can probably find it on their own. So I gave all that up, or I do a lot of community work that is kind of under the radar. I do a lot supporting the Native American community, Denver, elsewhere, and there's a touch of that on my website. But again, I've kind of learned to compartmentalize what I do. So for better or worse.
Yeah. Very cool. Thank you. One of the questions, I know I posed this to you before we hopped on, but I think as Hannah and I do this podcast more and more, we're really trying to figure out, there's a story that we're all told from our families and our religions and our cultures and our schools and in many different ways about, here's what will make you happy, or here's what a good life is. Here's what will make you well. Here's what will make you feel connected. It's usually like hitting some markers, career, family, house, some level of success, some level of finances. And so we're really talking to people about, as they're living their lives and unraveling these truths or lies or stories, what have they been told about happiness that they actually find to be untrue? And I'm curious where that sits for you.
Yeah, when you pose this to me, before we hit record here, I really love that question because I do a lot of interviews, and that's something I've never been asked before. What have we been told professionally or personally about the good life or success markers that wasn't true, and how does that apply to me? And I'm like, wow, I've never really thought about that. But then it took me a second or two, and it came to me. And for me, I think one of the things that I was told anyway, or I had internalized that I later backed away from, had to do with the practice of law and being an attorney. So let me give some context here.
Okay.
I grew up in fairly challenging financial circumstances. So I grew up in quite a bit of poverty. My family, never had much money to begin with, and my mother and my dad divorced, and I grew up in rough neighborhoods in Denver and Aurora. And we really, I'm a first generation college student. Neither of my parents graduated. We didn't have any money. I had to, I've been working since age 14. I worked full-time jobs while going to high school.
Wow.
I worked 40 hours a week at Village Inn, at Colfax and Yosemite,
Yes.
waiting tables in the middle of the night. It's gone now. It's an AutoZone now. So I didn't have much money. So when you grow up poor, and you see what your parents are going through with the bill collectors calling and lights being turned off and such, you want a career that you think will make money for you, and so I'd always been told that, well, that's being a lawyer. Okay. So I liked books, and I didn't, I hadn't yet come around to the social science stuff and the math, and so I studied political science and theater at the University of Colorado in Boulder. And then everybody's, well, you should go to law school. And okay. And then, so I really bought into that. And so I did. I started off at Tulane Law School, missed Denver, transferred back to the University of Denver Law School, finished there. I did well there. I was an editor on the Law Review, got a job as an attorney, and quickly discovered, well, let me back up as well. You're told that in law, once you pass the bar exam, and if you get a good job at a private law firm, or what the kids today are calling big law, they call it that.
Okay.
That's what they call it. That means one of the big fancy firms, New York, DC, 17th Street in Denver, that pay a ton, that you've made it. And all of a sudden the brass ring and happiness shall descend upon you.
Right.
And so, I got this job. Now, I didn't get one of the fancy big law jobs, but I got a good job. And I was really pretty miserable.
Yeah.
And everything we'd been told really turned out not to be true. And I was talking with one of my former students at Metro State. I won't name him, but he's a good guy. We're actually friends now. I helped him, and he got into one of the top law schools in the country. And he did get a job in New York City at one of the very top law firms, making an absolute ton of money, and got out. Just absolutely hated it. And so a lot of what I think we were told about, we were sort of socialized to believe that the big fancy law firm job will make you happy. But in fact, it's a really tough way to make a living. My student was telling me that they would actually monitor how much time he would get for bathroom breaks, and they would shout at him if he took too much time. I'm like, wait, what?
Wild.
I know. I had never heard of this. He got chewed out and threatened with his job. They would time him, because in law, you're billing by the hour. You're billing by the minute, and he was absolutely miserable. And so, I feel bad because my older son, David, is at this point planning to go to law school. I'm reasonably sure that he is not going to watch his podcast. My son is singularly unimpressed with anything I do. So I'm pretty sure he will never see this. And I will, of course, support him if he does, in fact, make a journey as an attorney, lawyer. But I will tell you that I think there are great jobs in law, but they aren't always tied into like the fanciest law firm in New York City or whatever. And that message is not being sold, in law schools. And so I practiced for about 2 years, and I was just miserable and unhappy in every way. And then I taught a class at Arapahoe Community College. And I was like, this is it. And within a year, I had enrolled in a PhD program to become a professor at the University of Texas. I still love teaching. I mean, not every minute of it is great,
Sure.
but so yeah. So I mean, I think in a lot of professions we're taught that we're socialized to believe that if this thing happens, the bell will go off and you'll be happy. And then sometimes you get that and it's like, oh no, actually this is terrible. So
I think that's so helpful. And I love that both about certainly law. And then I also think medicine can also be this way, where it's a very, very rigorous and demanding training. And you have to already have a lot of smarts to get in that world, you know, and a lot of times we push our very smart people in that world. And then the other side of that is not always what, you know, you're a doctor, you're a lawyer, can very socially be like very impressive, right? But you're saying that is not what brought me happiness.
It's funny because I'm fighting this right now. I feel vestiges of it. So my younger son, who is applying right now to college, is very, very, very bright, and you know, has done a lot of medical research, a lot of science and all that. And the dad in me was kind of like, well, you know, maybe you want to be a doctor, right? Yeah. So, you know, but to his credit, I think he's internalized what I've been saying, and he wants to do medical research. He wants to do research and try and cure diabetes, or, you know, do public health work to help Native Americans, which certainly not as lucrative as being a plastic surgeon, right? You know, sure. But you know, or whatever, you know, and so I'm really happy. But even now, I could feel myself like, well, you could do that and be a doctor, right? Because you know, and so I want to, you know, and I realize my own hypocrisy, you know, sure. But I want him to be financially secure, but he's going to be fine. Yeah, he's going to be fine. Yeah. So
I'm not a parent, so I'm always like, you know what? Good on you, parents, for doing that, like incredibly difficult work of trying to let somebody be who they are, and then also trying to make sure they're okay in the world. Like I can't even imagine the demands of that for you all. Before we wrap up, it is Native American Heritage Month, and I was just curious. We were talking before, if any of our listeners are hearing what you're talking about and or are already coming at some of these issues and saying, I don't feel good about this injustice, I want to be helpful, how do I support our Native American populations? Do you have any suggestions for us? Any organizations you love working with?
I do. So again, I don't mean to keep pushing people towards my website, but
push away. I'm here for it.
On davidweiden.com, I have a tab. I'm not sure what it is. I think it might be book clubs. Yeah, I have a tab on the website, book clubs. If you click on that tab and you scroll down, at the bottom of the page, I have 3 of my favorite organizations where I think a donation can really help. Okay. And in Colorado, we have one of the great Native American organizations right up in Boulder. The Native American Rights Fund is a law firm that, you know, small, but very plucky, and they fight for Native American causes across the country. And, you know, for them, I mean, I think, you know, that is a great way to support Native causes in general. Now, if somebody reads my novel and they really want to help the Sichangu Lakota people, I do list a couple of organizations on our reservation where people can, in fact, donate. We've got a place called the Tree of Life and all that, and we could use it. So Great. The Pine Ridge Reservation, which is right next to us, much better known. Crazy horses from there. The Wounded Knee Memorial Site is there. They're just better known. They have something like, I've been told, 100 charities and charitable organizations that travel there and help them out. Okay. We have 2. Okay. But you know, our people, the Rosebud Lakota people, we are struggling just as hard as Pine Ridge, but we don't have as many charitable groups that are coming in and trying to help our folks out. So, I mean, by all means, help Pine Ridge if you'd like to, but I would urge listeners, you know, to take a look at my website and help out people on our reservation. So let me share with you a little bit about how Rosebud could really use some help. So my son, who is a speed cubing champion, raised money and got 100 Rubik's Cubes. We purchased them. We've traveled to the reservation. He gave them to the kids. They needed a tutorial. And the Boys and Girls Clubs of Rosebud, they said, this is great. Nobody ever helps us. We need these sorts of materials to help these young men and women on the reservation. So, anybody that wants to give money or, support or something to the Boys and Girls Clubs of Rosebud, they could use it. So there are plenty of ways to support the reservation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And we will definitely link all of that so people can find that easily. But I also wanted to mention, you mentioned the book club tab on your website, and you've posed some great questions for book clubs to discuss some of the themes in your book. So I highly encourage, if you have a book club or you want to get a group of people together, to read Winter Counts and to have some of those discussions, because they're really thought-provoking and interesting questions. I think that's a great way to dig in with the book. Yeah. David, what a delight to talk to you. Please tell our listeners what you're working on now, what's coming up for you, how to find you, all of that good stuff.
Well, I mentioned the website enough, and that has plenty of options. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, what I'm working on, I get at least one query, once a week or something. Is there a sequel to Winter Counts? Yeah. And the answer is yes.
Yay!
There is a sequel.
Great.
It is called Wisdom Corner.
Ooh, okay.
It's largely done. I'm working on the ending a little bit. I'm not sure what the release date will be, but it takes place about a year after the Winter Counts ends. And so all of the same characters are back, plus some cool new folks. So Wisdom Corner coming out from Echo HarperCollins.
Okay.
I have a couple of other things if people can't wait. I know that some are listening to this, but I have a new short story in a book called an anthology of short stories, Crimes Against Nature, edited by Robert Lopresti. And I have a new Virgil Wounded Horse story in here.
Great.
That is that deals with the issue of wind energy on the Rosebud Reservation. And then I should note too, this is not my work, but I'm the editor of the Native Edge series of the University of New Mexico Press. And so we have put out 3 books. So I get to choose the books that we publish. And this book came out. It's our first book. It's called The Indians Won by Martin Cruz Smith. And it's an alternative. It's been out of print for 40 years. And we reissued it. And I wrote a new foreword to the book.
Wonderful. Okay.
And it's an alternative history. What if Native Americans had won the war against the Americans? And the North American continent actually was controlled by natives today, and the USA was confined to the coasts. And so it's a really, really fascinating look. And we just got a review by this big fancy history professor at Auburn University or Clemson. And he said, this book is a better teaching tool than most textbooks as to some of the issues that I teach about. And I was like, wow.
Yeah.
So, anyway, so it's called The Indians Won. So yeah, lots of good stuff happening. But take my website. That's where everything is posted.
Excellent. Excellent. We'll make it so easy to find you and find all of those details. David, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today and sharing your wisdom and talking about all of the things that you're doing. I really appreciate it.
Really my pleasure. Thank you. Yes. And thank you to everybody listening or watching out there. Really my honor and pleasure. Thank you again.
Yes. Thank you. You've been listening to Are We Happy Yet? A podcast brought to you by Green Roof Studios. This episode was produced, recorded, and edited by Jane Thatcher Hahn and Hannah Buzzo. All original music was written and recorded by the Jane Thatcher Band. For more information about the show, or to get in touch with us, please visit our website at www.arewehappyyetpodcast.com. Thanks for joining. See you next time.